starting to be an ordinary day, and of course the CIO calls and effectively says, hey, there's this thing going around, we've got network connections, 2 of the companies that we work with appear to have really been seriously hit. What are we going to do?
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Todd Inskeep, founder of Encrypted Solutions. Todd has over 30 years of executive security leadership experience.
I got my start actually working on radio cryptography for the Navy research labs when I was in college, and just found it fascinating. And it created an opportunity for me to move into the National Security Agency, where I spent about a dozen years working first in radio security and then in computer security. And that meant I get to spend a lot of interesting time in computer security when it was still very early. I worked with the guys who wrote the Orange Book. I got to work with Microsoft and Netscape when the internet was really just starting to become a security force. And then I joined one of the large banks and got to work through some of the toughest problems that the banks were having at the time when all of this was new, when hackers really were still teenagers in their basements.
Yeah, we don't talk about script kiddies too much anymore, do we?
No, we really don't hit the script kiddie stuff anymore. But at the time, that was a big threat, and it was a big transition from thinking about those nation-state level threats to thinking about criminal threats. And then it's just always fascinated me to think about the difference between defense and offense. We always talk that offense is easier because you only have to find that one weak link. And it's always seemed to me that offense feels sexier, and of course you get that with the hacker stories and the Great War stories. On defense, we don't get to tell some great stories all the time, but I have one. It's quick, but while I was working at the bank, we found an interesting way to just change some of the subtleties of our web pages in a way that forced the hackers to go through a lot of extra work while all we had to do was make a couple of changes in a line of code. And it meant that we could play with them a little bit and make them work harder while we weren't doing very much at all.
Kind of like keeping the scammer on the phone for 15 minutes for fun. Not that that's a practice that we can do nowadays.
Exactly. And the interesting thing about that is, if you go back a few years, we always have this bear analogy, right? That you don't have to be fastest. You don't have to be faster than the bear or be the fastest. You just have to be faster than everyone else. And I think what's really interesting is, over the past couple of years, the bears have really figured out how to clone themselves with the cloud. And if you think about the way people are using spear phishing attacks, the way that they're using a variety of ransomware attacks and malware attacks, the bear really has multiplied himself. So there's a bear for everyone now, and you can't just be a little faster than your peers because there's a different bear chasing you. You really have to be thinking about how to be better than the bear now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy. It was always you just had to outrun that one bear. But and I think ransomware has really brought the security issue to every company. Remember when we used to have these conversations with companies? Well, why would they want to hack me? I don't have any data they would really want, and you just don't hear companies articulating that anymore. because of ransomware.
Unfortunately, you still find a few companies thinking that way, but ransomware has really brought it home that every company has a vulnerability that a malicious actor can take advantage of. They can look for money in places where we wouldn't have thought about it. A couple of years ago, we started talking about it more as finding new ways to monetize the attacks. And ransomware is really the ultimate way to monetize it, because controlling that data means that you can really ask for money in a lot of different ways. You can ask for money to release it. You can ask for money not to make it public. You can still make it public and find value from it. The other thing that's really interesting with ransomware is I was talking to a team the other day, and they had encountered a situation where 3 different ransomware or multiple ransomware variants had hit a single company, and they ended up, not just trying to figure out how to break one, but because the data had been encrypted by a first ransomware, then a second ransomware, then a third ransomware, they were having to negotiate with 3 different ransomware adversaries to try and get keys or data back. And they had this situation where if they couldn't get all of them to agree, then there was no value to paying any of them.
Amazing.
So it was a really fascinating story about just how insidious this can be and how tangled things are getting now around ransomware and around the availability of your data to do your business.
So when somebody is hit by this ransomware, should they be paying the ransom? How does somebody decide that?
Every company has to think about it differently, and they have to think about it differently not just from their operations and their funding and their ability to pay, but they also have to think about it from their ability to recover the data in other ways. There's a lot of stories now where companies who have good records and have the ability to recover the data are still paying a ransom because paying the ransom is cheaper as a way for them to get back to the data than executing their recovery process. So it really does depend on how the ransomware has actually impacted the company, whether or not you pay. And then even if you make a decision that you might be willing to pay, you have to think very carefully, how do I know that this isn't a nation state like North Korea or Iran, where giving them money potentially becomes a significant legal issue for the corporation? You want to make sure that you're not paying terrorists, that you're not paying drug dealers. So there's a lot of things that you have to think about, even if you're potentially willing to pay. And of course, the best way is to do more to prevent these attacks, to detect and contain them, and then to have really good recovery practices that you've actually tested so that you can recover the data in a relatively straightforward way.
Mm-hmm. So do you think a lot of companies are doing that testing of their procedures?
Not as many as need to. I think it varies widely based on the company's overall posture and the way that the executives and the board think about cybersecurity and the impacts of cybersecurity risks on the company, whether they've made the full investment necessary to do that.
So how should they do that testing, and how often?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think you need to have done it at least once recently, for the simple reason that most companies have never done it. We did some testing with the bank several years ago where we actually did an A/B switch between main sites just as a way to prove that we could actually make that switch. Most companies have never tested their procedures, and so you need to do it once to build some confidence. And then I think it's beneficial to kind of slowly hone into doing it annually, doing it quarterly. I'm not sure you need to do it more than quarterly, but something approaching annually to semi-annually gives you a level of confidence. And of course, it depends on what you're trying to recover. You probably don't need to practice turning everything off in the company and recovering the whole company. but you need to think about what are the specific systems that are important. ERP systems, for example, are really critical in a lot of manufacturing companies. So you want to really think about your ability to recover an ERP system. Depending on what data you're using and how you use data in the organization, some of your data storage, the applications that use that data, probably are pretty critical, and those are the things you want to think about. It's like any other effort in information security where you really need to prioritize where you spend your time, not do everything, not spread peanut butter, but really focus on the pieces that matter.
That makes a lot of sense. So you had some great experience. I say great experience, not the kind of experience somebody walks in on a Monday and says, I think I'd like to have a ransomware attack. So why don't you walk us through, you had a situation with NotPetya.
Yeah, so I was working for one of our clients as the interim CISO, and walk in on the morning of June 27th when NotPetya struck. Starting to be an ordinary day, and of course the CIO calls and effectively says, hey, there's this thing going around, we've got network connections, 2 of the companies that we work with appear to have really been seriously hit. What are we going to do? And of course we'd been talking, like so many companies do, about the fact that we didn't have a fully tested disaster recovery plan. Our incident response plans were still, drafty, and so we started making it up, not completely by the seat of our pants, because we've got some experience on the team, but really thinking through what's happening, how much do we know, in 5 or 10 minutes, what can we find out, so that we have some basis for making some decisions. And of course, what we found out very quickly was that one of our major vendors that we used for distribution had been hit. Their operations were completely out. And then one of our major customers had been hit, and their operations were completely out. And so we started to say, well, not knowing what it is, not knowing how it's spreading, but knowing that we've got network connections with both companies, let's cut the network connection. Let's take anybody who was working in either of those locations off of our network. Let's be abundantly cautious and try and work through it. Of course, knowing what we know today, we were already too late. The rate that NotPetya spread through an organization was so fast, where it got access to Windows administrative passwords, that the decision would already have been made for us, and we would have been taken down if we were sharing domains or sharing passwords and admin IDs in any way, shape, or form. We were lucky none of that happened, but we then had to start thinking about, well, when do we reconnect the networks? What would make us confident that that's okay to do? Who do we know at these 2 corporations to be able to have conversations and make those decisions? And then we've got call it 100 users who now can't connect to our network, can't connect where they were normally working. What are we going to do to make ourselves feel comfortable that their machines are okay to be used? Again, not knowing what this incident is, what the code looks like, what it does, how it spreads, or anything else, all in these first couple of hours. And those first couple of hours are the hairiest part of an event, when you don't know very much, but you need to make some decisions and do something. I think it's important to remember the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which says, don't panic. Because this is the time when you really want to panic.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, available at Amazon.com and other booksellers.
And the company is really looking at the CISO to navigate out of this situation, right? Isn't there the extra stress that your career is really on the line at that point?
As the CISO, they're really looking at you. It's interesting. I ran a war game recently with an executive team for another client, and we actually were simulating in the war game, taking out some major systems and really shutting down a lot of the client's business activities. And in the after action, we were talking to the CISO who had tried very hard to follow their incident response plan, which says we're going to, and most response plans do this, we're going to set somebody up as the incident manager. They're going to be the interface to the team and the interface to the executives. There's an executive level incident manager for a major event. And the CISO was trying very hard to say, I'm not the incident manager, I'm the CISO. I need to help manage my team, help them do the forensics, help them do the investigation. And we kind of agreed to disagree because I see this in reality. The executive team is looking at the CISO to manage a cyber event. It doesn't matter what your plan says. It's like any other element of warfare, right? Your military strategy is great until you actually contact the enemy, and then it all goes out the window, and the CISO is the one that's in charge. And the CISO is the one that everybody is asking, what do we do next? What do we do next? Who's doing things? And so forth.
So did you have any issues with, the communication with the NotPetya event where the board is asking, the executive management is asking for answers right now, and you have a team that's trying to still figure out what's going on?
Yeah, we were lucky. The organization I was working with was small enough, and we were quick enough, and of course I bring some experience working in time before getting there, that we actually got ahead of the board and the executives. So I actually was able to reach out to the CIO and say, look, here's 3 things you need to think about, right? Here's what we know, here's what we don't know yet. And oh, by the way, this is probably going to have a material impact. The CFO needs to know what's happening, because remember, NotPetya hit just a couple days before the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, at the end of June. So you're looking at 6-month reporting for most companies. It's that second quarter results that are coming in where even the financials you have to worry about. Do we have the right numbers? Has this malware influenced our records in a way that means our financial records aren't reliable? You have to get ahead of that. You have to think about that material impact for reporting. You're not going to ship for a couple of days. That usually impacts what the revenue stream looks like. So you have to think about those and get ahead of that. And we were able to do that so that we were answering most questions before they'd been asked.
Good. So what sort of advice would you give people to help to prevent, not that we can prevent every breach from happening, but what would be like the prudent steps that people should be doing?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. We did some work a little while ago at how a lot of these breaches and activities actually happen. And particularly in this case with the spread of NotPetya, it was all about reusing credentials. And so simply moving to multi-factor authentication, even a multi-factor authentication that isn't perfect, does a wonderful job of just stopping the spread of things. If a malware like this can't act on your behalf with just a username and password, then it gets stopped cold really fast. Keeping patches up to date is critical, but we all saw companies hit by NotPetya that were fully patched against WannaCry and some of the preceding work that NotPetya took advantage of. So patch, stay abreast of things, multi-factor authentication. Those are the 3 basic things. Scan for vulnerabilities, fix the known vulnerabilities. Network segregation is another piece that we find a lot of people haven't really done good network segregation work. A lot of times you think purely in terms of the network flows, and you don't think about things like time management. NTP often flows across those network segments in a way that would allow something else to spread maliciously or continue moving. So thinking about segregation in a multifaceted, multidimensional way can be pretty important. But I stick to the basics. Good blocking and tackling, stay up to date, patch the vulnerabilities, configure correctly, and multi-factor authentication really are your friends.
And so how can those are a great piece of advice. How can the CISO enhance the incident response playbook so that when that happens, that it actually reflects the reality that you're advocating?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Incident response playbooks are really good for the day-to-day incidents that happen, the things that you just expect and investigate and kind of handle on a day-to-day basis. They're really good at helping you think through some of the executive roles and who needs to be involved. In a lot of cases, you're not going to fully follow that playbook when the rubber hits the road, but by practicing it, by having some exercises, you start building some muscle memory. And we've seen that organizations that build that muscle memory are often able to respond more quickly and to understand some of the nuances that no CISO, no matter how good or how much you pay them or how much budget you give them, is going to be able to completely prevent an event. The key is, can they react in the moment? Can they help you navigate through that and minimize the impact of unforeseen events? Wargaming, playing the exercise role, building a plan so that you've tested it with executives and that people know there's a plan really helps you out.
Well, Todd, this has been very insightful. I really appreciate that. This is just such an important area to make sure that we get right within our organizations, because as you said, it's very difficult to plug all those holes, and we need to be able to be in that position so that as leaders we can respond effectively.
Thanks, Todd. I think everything you've been doing with the CISO Compass to really give people a full view of what a leader needs to do, what a CISO needs to do as a leader, has been really important to the community, to the individual CISOs. So thank you for everything you've been doing as well.
Oh, well, thank you, Todd. I appreciate the compliment. And for more information, more podcasts, please look to the Cybersecurity Collaborative website. And thank you very much, Todd. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.